Greetings, friends. In this video, I'll be discussing obesity and slimness and how it compares across the world. And the thing that got me into this question was this photograph that Ramsey Paul was discussing in one of his recent videos. This photograph was pushed by, or maybe still is being pushed or propagated by the mainstream media as an icon of the poor, suffering Honduran migrants in their caravan finally having reached the U.S. border. And we see the poor plight of this mother with her two daughters, allegedly. And Ramsey Paul was pointing out a lot of funny things with this photograph. Like, first of all, she's got a fair amount of body fat. And so aren't you supposed to be starving in Honduras? Apparently, that's what they said. And then why are her daughters, they look like at least 6 years old, and they have diapers on? That's kind of weird. And if you've got all these NGOs taking care of you and driving you places, I'm sure they could give you some sandals or something. And then if we look in the background, over here we've got some guy with this tripod and some expensive looking camera. Well, you can't really see what it is, but it's enough that it needs a tripod. You got some other guy with a nice looking camera here. You can see it has a strap. So they're getting people to pose. I mean, I can't prove this, but oh, here's another guy with a photograph in the middle. We don't need to get into this whole question in this video. I was just more interested in the obesity thing because it's a decent question. Like, how come some poor countries have a lot of fat people? Because it's a fact that some poor countries, they still have a high obesity rate. I went to the World Factbook of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. It's public information. You can go to their website. I looked at over 50 countries, because I had to keep this video to a certain length. I don't want to just read all the stats for you, but I want to give you the general idea here because I looked up the obesity rates and the life expectancy rate for each of these countries. All the major countries in the world I included, all in terms of population or general importance. If a country is really small in population, or it just, not everything can be on our radar. I didn't look at Bhutan. I didn't look at Papua New Guinea. But I looked at Switzerland, even though that's a small country. That's a notable country. I looked at, Russia, all the big countries. And turns out the Anglo countries and many of the Arab countries are tied for most obese peoples in the world, or most obese races in the world. And I have the stats to prove it. And so we Anglos, I'm a 1/4% English, 1/4% Irish. I don't know how I didn't look at Ireland, but I'm 50% Latvian. Those genes help me be a bit slim for sure, because the Latvians are only about 23% obesity, which is a lot. That's way more than a country like India. We'll come to that later, but then in the UK, the United Kingdom, it's 27.8% obesity, and that stands out in Europe. There's not another European country. There probably might be some. I didn't look at the Netherlands, but they're not on that level. They're significantly less. France is significantly slimmer than the UK, Spain as well. But the USA takes the prize. They're 36.2% obesity. That's basically the highest in the world. You might find some individual country, but it's not on the scale and size as the US of A. Canada, 29.4% obesity. We have an 82-year life expectancy. The US only has 80.1. So we're 2 years up on the Americans. The UK is at 80.9 life expectancy. With, I mentioned about almost 28% obesity there. Australia, 29% obesity, 82.4 years. When I say years, you know what I'm talking about, life expectancy. New Zealand, 30.8% obesity, and then 81.4 years. So the New Zealanders are and forgive me because I have to look at the computer screen. I can't be looking at the camera all the time. But the New Zealanders are slightly fatter than the Australians and live about 1 year less on average. But then you have to give the credit to the other European countries. They're not nearly as obese, but being more developed countries, it seems that obesity just seems to be unavoidable. Just like that just happens when your civilization gets to a certain level. Maybe it doesn't have to happen, but that seems to be the case. Russia, 23.1% obesity, but There's still lots of problems in Russia, and the life expectancy is only 71.3. But I don't mean to suggest that one factor causes the other. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that. I couldn't look at all these stats because that would make the video too complicated, too long. Sweden, 20.6% obesity, 82.2 years. Poland, 23.1%. And 77.9 years. I know I could just show you a graph, but it's fun when I get to talk about it and give my comments. Ukraine, 24. Latvia, 23. I'm saying the percentages of obesity. Germany down to 22.3%. Switzerland down to 19.5%. Now, Switzerland and Germany both have high life expectancies around 80 to 80, almost 83 years, whereas Latvia, Ukraine, Poland, like I mentioned their obesity rates, but their life expectancies are also significantly reduced. Latvia is only barely 75 years, Ukraine's 72.4, Poland 77.9. France, 21.6% obesity, 82 years. That's way down from, that's better than the UK, significantly. Because what was the UK? Yeah, 80.9 years, 29% obesity. Spain, 23.8% obesity, 81.8 years. Italy, 19.9%, 82.4. Serbia, 21.5% obesity. It's very uniform in Europe. Although Serbia is only barely 76 years life expectancy. Italy is over 82 years. So is Spain's close to 82 years. Greece, 24.6 obesity and just under 81-year life expectancy. But I'm just giving you the picture of Europe. I couldn't look at every country. The Arab countries, very fat, almost on our level. In fact, you may argue that I don't know in terms of population, but there may be more fat Arabs than there are fat white people, because the Anglo countries don't have as many Anglos in them anymore because our replacement levels are low. Maybe it's the same in some of these developed Arab countries too, like Saudi Arabia. I don't know what the replacement level is, but in Saudi Arabia, it's right behind the U.S. It's 35.4% obesity, 75.7 years. That's a slightly, significantly less than the U.S. Egypt, 32% obesity and only 73.2 years. So Saudi Arabia is basically in second place, right behind the USA. 36.2. Yeah, they're less than a percentage point behind the USA in terms of how many corpulent people they have. The United Arab Emirates, almost 32% obesity, close to 79 years. I want to show you more about the Arab or Central Asian countries, because there's the Arabs and then there's the Central Asian. Turkey is 32.1% obesity. They're pretty fat. And 75.3 years. Iran, 25.8% obesity, 74.2 years. So they're significantly slimmer than Turkey, but they don't live as long as the Turks. So maybe you can't, maybe that's just due to different factors. Algeria, 27.4% obesity, 77.2 years. Libya, 32.5% obesity. There's not too many people in Libya. Unlike Algeria, Algeria is in the some tens of millions, but Libya is like only 8.5 million, but almost 77-year life expectancy. Israel, 26.1% obesity, 82.7 years. Kazakhstan, 21% obesity, 71.4 years. So I've showed you the Arab world, the Central Asian world. You can see that there's significantly higher obesity. It's basically on the level with the Anglo countries, or at least the other European countries. There are some other fat people in the world. There is one other fat race in the world. Can you guess which one it is? All right, time's up. It's the Latinos. Because, of course, you would have known that from the photograph I showed you. And that was the whole reason I started looking into this question. Mexico, 28.9% obesity. You know what? Forget the life expectancies. I'm not going to read that anymore because it gets too much and boring. But I'll tell you if the life expectancy is anything, out of the ordinary. But generally, it's less than 80 years for all of the Latin American countries. And let's say it hovers around 70 for the poorest. Let's just say that. So Guatemala, 21.2% obesity. El Salvador, 24.6%. Honduras, as we mentioned, 21%. Nicaragua, 23.7% obesity. These are supposed to be poor countries. Maybe not exactly all of Mexico, but Honduras. El Salvador, Nicaragua. These are poor countries, and yet they have almost a quarter of their people eating way too much food, taking in way too much calories than they expend. They may not be getting the nutrients. They may still be, malnourished. But it's interesting. If that's not starvation. Costa Rica is a bit wealthier. They're a bit different. 25.7% obesity. Panama, 22.7%. Colombia, 22.3%. Venezuela, despite all of their starvation. I mean, these stats might be 2 years old, so it's been worse in the last 2 years, but 25.6% obesity. So despite all that stuff in Venezuela, a quarter of their population are corpulent. Brazil, 22.1%. Brazil is a more wealthy country. That's a good rate. You know why it is? Because Brazil has more African origin peoples. That's why. Because once we get to Africa, you'll see. And then once we get to Asia, you will see. You will believe in race because of these statistics. Or not. But anyways, Argentina, also, they've got a lot of problems there, but clearly a more advanced country than some of these other ones. 28.3% obesity. That's actually getting into Mexico territory, and then almost on the level of the Anglo countries. That's getting into our club. If you live in Mexico or Argentina, you can join the Anglo club of corpulent people. You're fat enough, you can join us. What about Africa? There's still some fat people in Africa. It's not like Asia. There's probably, looking at these stats, I looked at many major Asian and African countries and some Southeast Asian countries. And the Africans hover around 8 or 9% on average per country. And that's about twice as much, or maybe not quite twice as much, but significantly higher than what you would find on average in Asia. But Ghana is the fattest country in Africa I could find. It's almost 11% obesity, with a significantly higher life expectancy. I know I wouldn't mention that, but 67.4 years. That was the highest one I found, because most of the other life expectancies in the countries I looked at hovered around 60 years or less than 60 years. Ivory Coast, 10.3% obesity. But their life expectancy is down to 60 years. So that's something else is going on there. They had a civil war. They have more problems than Ghana. Ghana is like relatively poor compared to the West, but Ghana compared to the rest of Africa is like, fairly good. It's not like a shining perfect world, but it's definitely like clearly the most successful country. You could argue Nigeria. I mean, I'm not talking about different situations with Mozambique and South Africa where you've got different ethnic groups, but in the terms of like a sub-Saharan Bantu origin country, Ghana is pretty much the number one at the moment. And then Mali, which is a very different country because it's farther north, 8.6% obesity. So if it's a desert country, apparently they can have some fat people there too. Senegal, 8.8%. Democratic Republic of the Congo, huge country, one of the biggest in the world, 6.7% obesity. So that's getting down lower, a poor country for sure. Tanzania, 8.4%. I lived in Tanzania for a number of months. So now we're leaving Africa. So you get the idea about Africa. India, 3.9%. That's like basically the lowest in the world. You could find lower rates, but in terms like that country has more than 1 billion people. And only, so that's a significantly high number of like thin people or malnourished people. I know myself from living in New Delhi for 11 weeks and traveling around the north of India. China, and of course, Asia has more than one race. That I didn't look at Pakistan, but we could assume it would be similar to Bangladesh and India. India may be slightly wealthier, but it's got lots of poor people too. So those countries, the South Asian countries, the South Asian race, they are going to be thinner people. But then I've seen West Indians here, and a lot of them tend to put on the fat too. So I shouldn't speak too much because apparently South Asian people can still get fat, but generally, and that's not something you see too often. That's not what I would see too often. China, we're now leaving the South Asian region, and they are 6.2% obesity. 75.8 years. Japan, 4.3% obesity. Can you imagine that? I didn't look at Korea, but it's probably around there. It's probably better than China, or less than China. That's impressive. And Japan has an 85.5-year life expectancy. In fact, I think that's the highest life expectancy I found in this list of over 50 major countries in the world. 85.5 years. So not only does Japan get the prize for like basically the slimmest major country, apart from some other examples, which you could find. I know, but just in terms of what I'm calling them major country, because the successful economy, I mean, sure, they've got their problems, but they're way better positioned than the Western countries right now. And so, yeah, I got to hand it to them. 85.5 years. That's pretty impressive. But then again, if you think about Canada, it's still like 82 or... Yeah, Canada's 82 years. So, that's something. It's not a totally different world, though. From what my acupuncturist was surprised. He said the Japanese have a very high-stress lifestyle. And but this statistic would be in my original assessment. Philippines, 6.4% obesity. They're only barely 70 years. Less than 70 years life expectancy. Thailand, 10%. So something's happening once you get to South Asia. What's going on here? I didn't look at Laos, but Thailand, 10%. Malaysia, 15.6% obesity. That's the highest percentage I found in that region. What's going on in Malaysia? Is it explained by the higher diversity? Is one of the groups accounting for it more than the others? Indonesia, it's below 7% obesity. So that's getting more into what I would expect. If you like this kind of statistical analysis and you're interested in the question of Islam and Christianity in Africa, then please see the link to the video I did over a year ago titled, How Do Islam and Christianity Stack Up to Each Other? I went into the statistics again, and I answer precisely that question based on very detailed analysis. Hasta luego, amigos!